Welcome to Discover Your Dreams, a space rooted in the grounded life philosophy where inner peace becomes the foundation for purposeful living. Here we explore emotional regulation, self-awareness, alignment, and self-trust, not as goals to achieve, but as practices that help us return to ourselves. Because life doesn't become meaningful when we become someone else. It becomes meaningful when we learn to come home to who we truly are. There are seasons in life when survival mode is exactly what gets us through. Something happens. Life becomes uncertain. Maybe there's a financial crisis. A relationship ends. Someone you love becomes sick. You lose your job, your home. You're caring for everyone around you. Or maybe it isn't one enormous event. Maybe it's years of smaller stresses piling up on top of one another until your body simply learns, stay ready, keep going, handle the next thing, don't stop, and don't fall apart. Sometimes that response is incredibly useful. Survival mode can help us endure things we never imagined we'd have to endure. The problem isn't that we go into survival mode. The problem begins when the emergency ends, but something inside us never gets the message. And eventually, we stop saying, I'm going through a difficult season, and start saying, this is just who I am. I'm always anxious. I'm always tired. I'm just someone who overthinks. I've always had trouble relaxing. I have to stay busy. I don't know how to slow down. But what if some of those things aren't personality traits at all? What if they're adaptations? What if your body became very good at helping you survive and simply hasn't learned yet that it doesn't have to live there anymore? That's what we're talking about today, the hidden cost of living in survival mode. Before we go any further, I want to make something very clear. I don't want us to demonize survival mode, because survival responses exist for a reason. If you are genuinely in danger, your nervous system isn't interested in whether you're living your most aligned life. It's interested in getting you through the moment. Your attention narrows, your body mobilizes energy. You become more alert to possible threats. Things that aren't immediately necessary become less important. And that's brilliant when there's an actual emergency. If your house is on fire, that's probably not the moment to sit down with your journal and contemplate your 5-year plan. Your body says, move, now. That's exactly what we want it to do. The problem is that the nervous system doesn't only respond to burning buildings. It can respond to uncertainty, conflict, financial pressure, work stress, relationship problems, loss, and overstimulation. And sometimes, even the anticipation that something might go wrong. When that happens, occasionally we recover. But when stress becomes chronic, we can begin organizing our entire lives around survival. And that's where the costs become much harder to recognize. One of the first things survival mode takes from us is something we rarely talk about: possibility. When you're trying to survive, your attention naturally focuses on what's directly in front of you. What needs fixing? What could go wrong? What do I need to handle today? What bill needs paying? Who needs me? What's the next problem? There's very little room for, what do I want? What would I love? What am I curious about? What could my life become? And that's important, because purpose requires imagination. Alignment requires awareness. Creativity requires space. You cannot easily imagine a beautiful future when your nervous system is constantly preparing for the next disaster. That doesn't mean you've lost your dreams. It may simply mean you've been too busy surviving to hear them. There have been periods in my own life where survival wasn't metaphorical. It was very real. There were things that had to be handled. There were circumstances I couldn't simply think positively about and make disappear. I had to keep moving, and I'm grateful for the part of me that knew how to do that. That part of me got me through. But here's something I learned later. The skills that help you survive one chapter can become limitations in the next one. When you've spent a long time expecting something to go wrong, peace can feel unfamiliar. When you've spent a long time doing everything yourself, receiving help can feel uncomfortable. When you've spent a long time making decisions based on necessity, asking yourself what you actually want can feel almost selfish. I had to learn that surviving something and recovering from it weren't necessarily the same thing. The circumstances could change before I did, and I had to teach myself that I wasn't required to keep living as though the emergency was still happening. That was a very different kind of work. This is one I think a lot of people will recognize. You finally get a day where nothing needs to happen, and instead of enjoying it, you feel restless. You start cleaning, checking email, looking for something productive to do. Maybe you sit down for 20 minutes and suddenly think, I should be doing something. Why? Because if your nervous system has associated constant activity with safety, stillness feels wrong. You might call yourself a workaholic, or say you're just a busy person. But sometimes busyness is more complicated than that. Sometimes movement keeps us from having to feel what becomes noticeable when everything gets quiet. And sometimes we've spent so long responding to problems, the absence of a problem actually makes us uncomfortable, so we look for one. This connects directly to what we've talked about before. When you're grounded, you can ask, what is right for me? When you're in survival mode, the question often becomes, what will make this discomfort stop? Those aren't always the same answer. You might stay somewhere because leaving feels uncertain. You might leave something prematurely because staying feels uncomfortable. You might say yes because disappointing someone feels threatening. You might say no because vulnerability feels dangerous. You might choose certainty over alignment simply because certainty feels safer. And this is why regulation matters so much. Not because calm is morally superior to stress, but because your internal state influences what you can see. Sometimes people come out of incredibly difficult periods and say, I should be happy now. Everything is okay. So why don't I feel happy? Because joy requires something survival doesn't. Enough safety to soften. Think about that. Joy asks us to be present, to notice, to receive, to stop scanning long enough to experience what's happening right now. But if your system is accustomed to asking what happens next, you can miss what's happening now. A beautiful sunset, someone laughing, your dog being ridiculous, a quiet cup of coffee, rain against the window, someone you love sitting beside you. Those moments may seem small, but they're where life happens. Survival mode can keep us so focused on protecting tomorrow that we don't actually experience today. So I want you to think about something. When was the last time you experienced something beautiful and actually enjoyed it without immediately thinking about what you needed to do next? Don't judge the answer, just notice it. Because awareness isn't criticism. Awareness simply allows us to see where we are. When survival mode lasts long enough, your life can become organized around external demands. What needs to happen? Who needs me? What needs fixing? What's expected? What's urgent? And slowly the question, what do I need, disappears. Then one day someone asks, what do you want? And you genuinely don't know. I've heard people describe this as losing themselves. I don't think that's quite what happens. I don't think you disappear. I think your own voice gets buried underneath everything you've had to attend to. And that's very different. Because buried things can be uncovered. Quiet voices can become audible again. You don't have to manufacture a new self. You have to create enough space to hear the one who's been there all along. This is why the 5 pillars work together. And this is where I want to connect us back to the grounded life philosophy. Because getting out of survival mode isn't simply about relaxing more. It involves every pillar. Regulation helps the body recognize that every moment isn't an emergency. Awareness helps us notice the patterns we've developed while surviving. Detachment allows us to say, "This helped me once, but it doesn't have to define me forever." Alignment helps us rediscover what feels true for us. And sovereignty allows us to begin choosing our lives instead of simply reacting to them. That's the return. Not returning to who you were before difficult things happened. I don't believe that's always possible, or even desirable. You've learned. You've changed. You've grown. The return is to the part of yourself that can once again participate in life instead of simply defending against it. One of the strangest things about coming through difficult periods is realizing that you don't automatically know how to live differently. You would think that when life finally becomes quieter, you'd immediately relax. But that hasn't always been my experience. Sometimes I've had to continuously remind myself, nothing is wrong right now. Not forever. Not nothing will ever go wrong again. Just right now. In this moment, I'm okay. And I've learned how powerful those words can be. Right now, I'm okay. Because survival mode lives so much in what might happen next. Grounding brings me back to what is actually happening now. And often, right now is much gentler than the future my mind is preparing me for. You don't have to force yourself out of survival mode. This is incredibly important. Please don't turn regulation into another demand. Don't hear this video and think, "Great, now I have to fix my nervous system too." That's just survival mode wearing different clothes. You don't force yourself into safety. You build experiences of safety, little ones, repeatedly. You sit outside for 5 minutes and notice the wind. You take a breath before answering. You allow yourself to rest without explaining why. You notice when you're rushing and ask, is there actually an emergency? You let someone help you. You leave something unfinished until tomorrow. You laugh. You play. You create something that serves absolutely no productive purpose. And slowly, your life begins teaching your nervous system you're allowed to live here too. Sometime this week, take a piece of paper and divide it into 2 columns. On one side, write survival. On the other, living. Under survival, write down the things you do primarily because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. Whatever comes to mind. Are you too busy? Saying yes automatically? Struggling to rest? Then look at the other column. Ask yourself, if I felt safe enough to actually live, what might I do differently? Maybe you'd rest before you're exhausted. Ask for help. Say no, or say yes. Try something without knowing whether you'll be good at it. Dream again. You don't have to change everything on that list. Choose one. One small act this week isn't about surviving. Something that is simply about living. I want to leave you with something that took me a long time to understand. Survival mode deserves gratitude. It helped you. Maybe it protected you. Maybe it carried you through something you weren't sure you'd survive. You don't have to hate that version of yourself. You don't have to be ashamed of it. You can simply say, thank you. Thank you for getting me here. I don't need you to run everything anymore, because I'm not just trying to survive my life. I want to be here for it. And I think that's one of the deepest expressions of a grounded life. Not a life where nothing difficult happens, Not a life without stress, but a life where difficulty no longer gets to define the entire landscape, where there is room for rest, room for joy, room for curiosity, for purpose, for possibility, and room for you. Maybe you've spent years becoming incredibly good at surviving. Honor that. But don't confuse your ability to survive with the limits of who you are. There's another part of you underneath all that vigilance. The part that creates, connects, dreams, plays, trusts, and experiences life instead of simply preparing for what might happen next. You don't have to become that person. You're already there. Sometimes they just need enough safety to come home. If the Grounded Life philosophy has become meaningful to you, I've created a small collection of journals, mugs, clothing, and other pieces inspired by these teachings. You'll find a link to the Grounded Life shop in the description below. Thank you for spending this time with me. Remember, the work isn't becoming someone else. The work is returning to yourself, because that's where peace begins and where a grounded life is built. Until next time, take good care of yourself.